Michelle?
Daniel.
OG
Rose. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do one of my favorite things. Hey, Michelle. What you thinking about, Michelle? What are you thinking about?
Well, thank you for the invitation. I've been thinking about a lot of things. I really liked your recording on Assuming the Best.
Oh, well,
I remember that like years ago.
14 years ago.
Really?
It was 14 years
No.
ago. No, trying to get third thoughts together. There was a paper I just rewrote or redid from 2011. Blew my mind.
Well, I remember it a while ago.
Yeah.
It's a very good idea. And actually, it's funny, this ties into a lot of different things. I just had the privilege and opportunity to be on Seth's podcast.
Oh, Seth.
I think it's Embodying Dialogues.
Yep. Musicality of being.
Yes, musicality of being. It was wonderful. It was so great to talk with Seth, and really love his work. And I love your conversations with Aspasia and Seth. They're great. Aspasia is great too. And I was thinking about assuming the best because it came up in our conversation as it relates to assuming the best about your body. It ties into a podcast recording I did called, I think it was like the Symphony of Symptoms or something like that.
Symphony of Symptoms, yeah.
Basically, the main idea is that symptoms can be signals, or, they really actually, if we think about the body energetically, they are signals. And so basically, if you think about it that way, you can actually learn to assume the best about your body, because it's not, it's not trying to like torment you, it's trying to tell you something.
Right.
Now it can feel like torment, maybe it can shed light on something related to how you understand torment or something like that. Like there could be relations there with torment, but on the whole, if you assume the best about your body, you're not going to think, oh, like it just hates me, or oh, it's just broken, or oh, it's just messed up, or oh, the world's against me, or oh, all of these things, right? When you assume the best, you have to slow down. I think Seth and I talked a lot about that too, where you have to actually slow down. I think assuming the best does actually require you to slow down and assume the best. Like you're going off of the starting assumption is that, oh, this might be something for me, for my benefit, for my like learning purpose. Somebody who has a different view. I know you're like in an epistemological or even ontological way in your recording where, okay, this person who the reason why they think what they think is because they believe it's the best thing to think or the best thing to believe. So you have to remember that is their framework, Now you may have a framework that's the opposite, or it's completely different, or it's very different, or it's very close. But you also have your way of thinking because you assume it. Typically we assume the best about our own thinking, but we don't do this. We don't assume the best about the other person's thinking because, and we kind of, in a sense, on a very low order causality, we kind of can't because, like you say, you have to sort of believe that yours is the best. Otherwise, you wouldn't really think it.
Even function.
Even if your thinking is self-sabotaging, you think you still ascribe to it and do it, and therefore you still think it's the best. Even if you wouldn't use that language for it. So you kind of have to, but. You have to sort of acknowledge that so that you can get to the place of then assuming the best of the other.
Exactly.
And that's important. And I think it can relate to the body as well. And there was maybe one more thing I was going to say. It slipped my mind now. But I do... Oh, that's what I was going to say. It's funny because I was also talking to Seth about like... basically the nuance... like we talked about wordplay at the end of the conversation, but like how words have... it's fertile ground for play and rethinking and making associations you would never otherwise make associations about or with. And I was thinking about with children, because I brought up this idea of, basically Haven and I got into a conversation because I was talking about like, if you first don't succeed, try again. That sort of trite expression that you learn in school. Yeah. Well, we were talking about that, but then he brought up the quote, maybe it's from Einstein, you should correct me on this, but the definition of insanity is doing the same thing the same way over and over and expecting a different result. It was, he wasn't intentionally countering me. He just was like, okay, he heard that and he's like, I heard this thing in a book, or I heard this thing from Dad or something, and he said that line, and I was like, he's like, that's kind of interesting, hey? Like juxtaposing those two things together, and I thought it was brilliant. And it led to a good conversation, and actually could even have a further conversation about it. But it's a great point. And why I bring that up is because children often show you the nuance of things, because in a sense they are a type of other to the adult. And another thing was like, I was talking to the kids today about like, donuts. A little snack fiasco happened at the library, and so it's just that I guess so. This is the thing. The thought I was get a snack, but some children didn't know that meant they could get as many snacks as they wanted up to the $1.50 mark, because that's what they had been given for snacks. And so some children got more than others because they realized they could max out their or they asked about maxing out their $1.50, and I said sure, and the others decided to pick a candy that was almost $1.50, but that was only one thing versus three things, and justice. Yeah. No, and I understand it. Like, it's but the confusion was that, well, we always only get one snack at the snack area, which is true, because I usually am like scrambling around for quarters. So it's like, well, kids, I found, 2 quarters for each of you. You can pick out one of the cheap snacks kind of thing, in my purse. I'm just kidding. But, there's a 50-cent snacks, there's $1.50 snacks, basically, or $1.25. Right. The reason why I'm going through all of this is because I said, I talked to them about how it's like, I can understand you think that you could only get one snack, but actually you could have used all of your giggle money if you wanted to, but that wasn't very clear. And what I got into was like, don't assume that you couldn't just because the norm has been not to. And then it got me thinking about...
You're inviting chaos.
Well, but this is the thing. Nuance can feel chaotic in a sense.
Yes, it can.
And the reason I'm bringing it up is because
Philip Reef tension.
Well, what I was saying is like, basically that, what they say, that kind of crude expression, what assuming does, right? Makes ASS out of you and me.
But it's both-sided, ain't it?
But that's the thing. So basically I was telling them, make sure that you don't assume. You are always welcome to ask if for some reason, whatever.
Yeah.
I kind of framed it as in like, if you would like something beyond what you picked, then you can ask me and I can say yes or no, right? Blah, blah, blah. Or do we have enough coins for that? Whatever.
Right.
Anyway, you can all judge me. Maybe I didn't handle this right at all. But I'm just telling you this experience and how it made me think about how we say these things to kids. And how we have these certain expressions like assume that, don't assume.
Yeah.
Don't assume. Yeah. But in some cases you shouldn't assume. Yeah. And in other cases you should assume. Because then I was thinking to myself, well, wait a second. I guess you should assume the rules, right? Like the rules would typically, whatever it is, the rules of gravity, the rules of, like those are things you should assume in a sense. Yeah. And then the whole very topic or paper title for this piece is called Assuming the Best.
Yeah.
And so, what it reveals is that it seems as humans that we do this thing called assuming.
Yes.
Let's think about when is it right to assume and when is it not right to assume. But this is all nuance, and we don't, often the reason why we abscond from using or inviting nuance is because it's more difficult. Yes. And you just want a hard and fast rule. And sometimes you do need a hard and fast rule. I'm not saying you don't. That's true. But there's something about the invitation to, that takes time. A lot of people don't feel like they have a lot of time, which there's a reality to that. However, there can also be a way in which if you don't get into the nuance, you don't get into life, really. Life is nuanced, right? The whole idea of having a concept of assuming the best is to realize that you can be right about what you believe and somebody can be right with what they believe because they think it's true, because they know it to be true for them. From their framework, that is the best way to think. So anyway, I just wanted to share a little insight on life and how these things come up and how to, attempt to tarry with them or work with them.
Absolutely.
And how it's funny because, again, the two examples of like, first you don't succeed, try again. Yeah. Except you could also be insane. Or don't assume about the rules of the snack area. And yet we should assume the rules about...
assume the best.
Like there's things, again, you don't assume about this, but then it's, in all honesty, there can be, and the reason why we often don't want to do this is because it can open up confusion too. Mm-hmm. And what we, I hopefully as humans who can be good critical thinkers can transmute confusion into nuance and realize that in some scenarios it's this and in other scenarios it's that with certain things. Now, obviously, there are hard and fast rules when it comes to certain things that keep you safe or not, or breathing and whatever. But a deep sea diver or somebody who, somebody who does even that, you might even find some sort of, rule bending for the scuba diver, or I don't know. You got what I'm saying. But the point of the matter is, yes, there are hard and fast rules. But this is interesting how assuming can be redeemed in this sense, when typically it's like, don't assume. And yet that very same sort of trite expression can be coming from assuming that you would not assume you would always assume the rules. Mm-hmm. So you don't assume because it makes an ASS out of you and me, right? That's what I heard in school. Yes. But you should assume all the rules of the school. Yeah. Understand, Yeah. So again, it's a bothness. It's interesting. Thank you for letting me share all of that.
No, very good. I mean, there's a few times. I think we were just speaking at the net about what Zizek's getting at when he says he doesn't like wisdom. I think the way to think about that, because it always depends on what you mean, is he's playing on the wise guy, which is the one who has a phrase like, try again, and they exploit that and they're seen as wise and insightful, but actually you could just turn around and say repetition leads to insanity, right? And the wise guy for Zizek kind of exploits that internal consistency, that problem of I would just put it, using the map as indestructible. I would say the wise guy exploits the problem of internally consistent systems for their own benefit. Like you could always spin around. Actually, it was at Voicecraft we were talking about this. You can always kind of spin it. You can always make a good case that it's important to be patient, but then I can turn around and make it sound wise to be quick and decisive, right? You can always spin things. And that very spinningness is precisely, actually, for Hegel, the truth that things pass over into otherness. There's a point at which being patient turns into passiveness. There's a point at which being decisive turns into stubbornness. And actually everything becomes about judging that mean, which then gets into why what Jockin teaches on Aristotle is so huge, is because the judgment of the mean, the awareness, the proportionality, it all comes down to that because everything passes over into otherness, right? Like there's a point where assumption turns into keeping out the other or keeping out complexity. And then there's also a point where assumption is necessary because you have to go into every situation with a starting position. Like there's no view from nowhere, as Nagel said. You have to go into discussions with a mode, right? And you have to assume that. But then, likewise, but how do you tell the difference between assumptions that are good to take on and ones that are bad to take on? Well, the short answer would be the assumptions that are based on some sort of structural, ontologically structural reality. So that the assumption is actually trying to keep you aligned with quote-unquote actuality, right? But the question is this, which assumptions are those, right? And this kind of points to why in conservatism there's an emphasis on history and tradition, because the tradition are the assumptions that have been tested and proven to be valid, or better than not, right? Now, as you move into a world that's alien, as Cadell will stress, with technology and the Nick Land, as Mikey talks about, then those assumptions might fail. But that doesn't mean they were not good assumptions up to that point, right? And you could argue we're in an age of very active thinking. I think, so assumption has to be based on a structural necessity, I'll just say. And like the thing that the paper on Assuming the Best is trying to argue is that we're trying to make assumptions that force us to contradiction, like thus to think, because for Hegel, contradiction is where thinking is, right? Like there's a difference between an assumption that keeps out thought and an assumption that forces you to think, per se, right? Like if I can just say that person thinks different than me, therefore I don't have to think about them, I can avoid them because they're stupid, well then there's no thinking. I'm using assumption to remove, to get the other out of the way. But if I say, wait a minute, I'm going to assume that the views that this other person has, they have a reason to have them, and they seem dumb and wrong to me, but I'm going to assume this person is not dumb, well, that creates a contradiction. You can't both be right if it's, for example, if you're both having a different view on, say, a trans-Pacific partnership or something like that. And yet you have to think that difference as opposed to avoiding the thinking, right? Now the paper is going to argue, and I think what you're getting at with the body is very... And we do have Paul has joined us today, but we've moved the coffee cup, so he's not going to press his face into it again. He actually basically got high off the coffee fumes last week. That was something else. But anyway, like the paper's going to argue, Assuming the Best is not... It's not based on a certain naivety. It's not based on a certain ignorance. It's actually necessary to earn reality. Because the reality is thought has to present reality to you in a manner that makes you believe you're more right than wrong. And in fact, you must apprehend everything as doing it correctly. Otherwise, you couldn't function. Like if you say, well, I know I don't know chemistry. Well, you know you don't know chemistry. It is impossible to experience reality in a sense, in a way that doesn't feel like grasping it. You have to experience reality as if you're grasping it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to you, right? Well, this is a problem, because that would mean that if you're grasping reality in a manner that doesn't correspond, you couldn't know, right? Or you're not readily going to know. You'd have to encounter your error. But here's the problem. Just as soon as you encounter the error, you experience that as learning. So you'll grasp it. So you never... The paper in the map is indestructible. The phenomenology of true ignorance argues you never experience not knowing you don't know. You experience knowing you know, you experiencing knowing you don't know, but you never experience not knowing you don't know. Well, that sets you up for enclosure right there. And the great battle, ultimately, of human life intellectually is to avoid enclosure. When the brain necessarily encloses you to not lose you, right? It has to enclose you so reality is not madness, right? Like you're saying, like, we have to assume things. Yeah, because if we didn't, we'd go crazy.
Yeah,
you know,
we have to assume that the words coming out of our mouth
mean something, right? And yet, there is some point where assumption turns into a major problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the very fact that we have to assume the best to avoid the problem of true ignorance may suggest that relations are ultimate reality, because the only way to actually tap into the power of relations is through assuming the best. But that would get into the phenomenology of assuming the best and the onto-epistemology ultimately. But the point is, and I'll throw it back at you, like, we have to experience the world as grasping, but that means the other experiences the world is grasping. And basically assuming the best is forcing yourself to take into account that the phenomenology of the other person must have arrived them at the view they have for good reason. And you're assuming the best to try to force yourself to think that.
Yeah.
There's other things, like we talk about. Augustine argues there's no such thing as a bad motive. If you think you should do X, then you think it's good to do X. Even if it's like murder, you think it's good to murder. Then there's no such thing as a bad motive. So a few things. These are all the structural realities of thought that justify the assumption of assuming the best. So it's not an assumption that's just based on a whim. It's based on structural realities of thought. So first, true ignorance is you can't experience what you don't know you don't know. So you can't experience what you don't know you don't know. Second, the brain has to make you feel like you're correct to function. 3, there's no such thing as a bad motive. And 4, you could also point out that the brain wants to save energy, and I know Alex Ebert emphasized that with Frisk. Like, the brain is an energy-saving phenomenon. So that's one of the reasons as well that it wants to enclose itself and be done with it. Like, the brain doesn't want to think. It wants to survive. Thinking is energy-intensive. The brain is always trying not to think.
Yes.
It's trying to avoid it. So here's the thing. All 4 of those are true, okay? Then what is the assumption that you could have going into reality that would increase the probability of you working against those necessary tendencies of thought in a manner that does not lead to madness or a lack of intelligibility, but creates more openness than not, right? Well, assuming the best. Because what you end up doing is saying, well, if my brain does that, my frenemy brain, then the other's frenemy brain must do it as well. And assuming the best forces you to basically try to overcome those structural limitations that are also necessities in a manner that actually affords you encounter with the other. And then also forcing yourself to think more. Because otherwise you're not. Like, if you don't assume the best of the one you think is wrong, you're going to stop thinking. It's only a matter of time before you're done thinking. I think there's a lot to be said about what you're saying with the body. Because, there's a lot that gets into that as well. But I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to kind of go on the point you're talking about with not thinking, like our brains will always kind of seek the path of least resistance, right? 100%. Like, we don't, our brains want to save energy. So that's why it does require energy to be open to thinking the alternative or the other. Yes. Because otherwise you're kind of you sort of will automatically default to shutting it down as a possibility, just so that you don't have to spend the energy on that.
If you're tired, you're not going to do this.
No, and that's why it does seem to be. It's kind of to me and Seth. Oh, sorry, Polly. Yes. Me and Seth were talking a little bit about the difference between self-care and self-inquiry, because for whatever reason, and maybe it shows my cards to say it, but there can be some fraught things about the concept of, or the terminology of self-care, or it can be easily captured, I suppose, by certain things. But if you're afraid to ever I don't know, quote unquote, be seen as doing self-care, then, you probably should say, no, I'm doing it for self-care, just to be able to make sure you're not like so against it that you
exactly.
won't,
That's right.
engage in that.
You have to assume the best of the term.
Exactly. You have to assume the best about self-care.
Yeah, and that means, and I should just add too, the only way to earn your disagreement is to assume the best as well. Like, assuming the best is actually the only way to truly disagree.
Exactly. That's a great point, Daniel. It's actually the only way, like you're saying, like, also if you want to convince somebody, you could not do it without assuming the best. Absolutely because there's no way to get into their field of communication and into their, there's no way to talk to the person unless you assume the best. So yeah, it's important. And I think too, this idea of so the reason why I brought up self-care, we came up with thinking about it could just be more helpful and more descriptive to think about self-care as self-inquiry. Where you're taking time to actually do a type of self-inquiry. Because a lot of people conflate, like, even doing something like journaling with, like, oh, I'm being self-indulgent because I'm taking time to do this when I really should be doing the dishes. I'm just giving you some example. Sure. When really it's like you're doing the work of self-inquiry. And that, yes, does it mean you have to take some time to do something, quote, unquote, for yourself? I guess, yes, it could be considered strictly self-care, but it is a type of self-care that is the action of inquiry, of curiosity with yourself. And that actually is not, that's for you and everybody that's ever come before you, everyone who will ever come after you, and everybody in your proximity and your relations, because it impacts you. It impacts you to do self-inquiry. It does actually, if we think about the Artist's Way, when Julia Cam is talking about the morning pages, it changes you to actually get in touch with that voice that you keep on either projecting on everybody else, or that you just leave silently as this nebulous sort of stuckness that you feel. So anyway, but I'm bringing this up because there's sort of a way in which it's you do the self does seem to need a good foundation in order to do this work of the other, of engaging with the other, and doing the assume of the best. If you're like you're saying, if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you've got a lot on your mind, if you're like, no way in the world you're going to be able to do assuming the best. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And that's where, again, this assuming the best about the body could come in, where it's like, oh, okay, it does actually need certain nutrients. It does need certain things to be well, so that I can actually be strong enough to engage. Because you do need to be strong. It's hard. It's really hard to assume the best. And really, really assume the best, which means to genuinely believe the other is like very justified, and essentially that you have to open up yourself that they could be right. I could be wrong. And to the book, I've been talking about the Difficult Conversations book. It says that how everybody knows that they're supposed to say that, oh, everybody is, you're supposed to kind of assent to the fact that, oh, yeah, I could be wrong, but nobody really believes it. And so it's really, really, really allowing yourself to believe, not so simply that I could be wrong, but that they might be right. And somehow I still feel very much sure that I'm right, and yet we both are existing. So if we can do the work of assuming the best, we have to be, it's a vulnerable thing. And it's but it's also you need a lot of strength to do it. You need a lot of energy. You literally need more energy for your brain to do that. Anyway.
No, I think you're getting at a lot of very important things. I mean, what you said there makes me think of Luke's work. It goes on Gurdjieff. It makes me think of Seth's work. It makes me think of Jacques' work on health. And, I'm through the Class Accept the Pro seminar, and I think there's this real emphasis in Aristotle that health is obviously not merely running 5 miles, that it's tied to virtue, it's tied to energy, it's tied more... Jonkin was really emphasizing health as more of almost space. Like health is a kind of space you occupy, which means it's a relation between subject and object and environment. And also, we in the modern world don't think of health in terms of space. Like and it's true, when you look at ancient architecture, there's much more on an idea of, is the city close to the marsh? If so, then people get sick and the city doesn't facilitate health, right? Like that there's this idea that you can't even think health unless you also think the space that bodies are in. Like if you don't think the space bodies are in, you get into trouble.
Yeah.
You don't think health as well if you don't think virtue, the mind. And Luke emphasizes energy with Gurdjieff, that there's a certain energy that if we don't tap into, we really miss out on human subjectivity in its fullness. And obviously Seth with the musicality of being is getting at this. But the point is, that one of the reasons we don't assume the best is because of the energy demand. And if we don't have health, and we don't have time energy, as Dave emphasizes, then we're not, we're barely paying the bills, dang it. We're barely getting by.
Just get by.
Yeah.
And I think too, and this is why I do think the self-care is relevant here, because if self-care isn't understood as to what actually enables you to get in touch with energy, like because Julia Cameron in her book The Artist's Way will talk about spiritual electricity, right? She talks about this like energy that you're actually trying to tap into when you do this work of essentially self-inquiry, self-allowance, in the sense of let's write down everything you're thinking about. Literally just write it out. Write it out. Your fears, your to-do list, you're hungry, whatever it is, your dream last night. You're literally trying to get to a sense of that, what's at, like, what is this force? And, we talked about it a little bit when we talked about the phenomenology of the artist, but basically there's like, it's true with stories as well, where it's like, oh wow, something's gripping a hold of me, and it's a story, and I have to I'm allowing this force to come through me.
Right. And
so, but if we have this, like, in a sense, that's a form of, it's like where it's the ego is actually being an ego death for the sake of that actual self to come forth, right? And if you only think of self-care or as caring for yourself as like doing the comfortable, pleasant, easier things, it doesn't mean, like, sometimes the hardest thing is getting, asking to take a nap because you're so scared to impose. So yes, it depends on it's very, very particular. It's very, very particular per person. However, if our culture kind of just has it as like, have a glass of wine and some dark chocolate and a bubble bath, and like, it's never really, you are not going to be that's not necessarily energizing. Is it? It might be. It might not be. Again, it's very, 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 very particular. But if we don't have a sense of what it means to actually like recharge, actually gain energy back, which might look like doing things we're not used to or that we're uncomfortable with, or like if you like to be inside all day long, maybe it means going outside and getting recharged by the elements, for example. So these things, and it's getting more, like we talk, more and more of a non-rational choice to do so because of hikimorism, and you could just stay inside and never go outside, Right. And so basically the point of the matter is, we have to understand what it means to take care of the self.
Yes.
aka self-care, in such a way that is mindful of the energies and mindful of restoring energy, and also that isn't just a kind of escape, right? Where, okay, well, it felt really nice to do that, but now I'm back in like my everyday life. Daniel's making faces for Paul. Self-care. Self-care. So yeah, it's a great sentiment, but if we're not, if we don't get into the weeds and the nitty gritty of what it means to care for self, it either becomes a momentary escapism, right, or it becomes it becomes something that ultimately might drain energy overall, in the overall system, rather than it give energy, bring energy. I maintain energy. So
well, Jockin might say that the issue is self-care in those circumstances, individual care. It's not environmental, so it's not changing the environment, and therefore it's nothing but a temporary band-aid, right? Because you're not changing the overall energy environment. I mean, it goes to what you were saying on rest and energy. Like, rest is not the lack of work, it's energy creation, right? Like, rest is found in the 8-hour conversation where you lose yourself. Rest is found in the jazz improvisation, right? Rest is not found in binging a show. Rest is found in friendship. Ultimately, the giant subject is philosophical friendship, which I know Jockin is pointing to and is to do next after beauty, health, and friendship, because he's correct that those are deeply linked. But friendship is rest. And in a world of lost connections, to reference that book, where there is no friendship, then no, people don't have rest. But it also should give us hope, because I do think when you ask questions of how do we structurally give people less burdens at work, bills, and stuff like that, it can seem impossible. But if we say, well, actually energy comes from friendship, then if we could just figure out how to restore friendship, then that would go a long way. That's, belonging again, part 2 is obsessed with that. But no, energy is tied to rest. Rest is not what we think it is. It's more of a festival, as maybe Piper would put it in his book on leisure, a Sabbath energy. And we have to figure out, and the problem also with the self-care is, take a bubble bath. It's individuated. It's individual, Like it's reifying the ontology of individualism, right?
Atomization.
And atomization.
Versus like real connection. Because ultimately talking about the rest is also
real connection.
Yeah,
and that's a connection, electricity,
it's electrical.
right?
It's an electrical, and you're plugging into something, and that is real beyond you and not finite. Like you're just getting, leeching off of another human being. It is connection with others, but there's a radical, like I talked about it with Seth, where it's like, for those who may ascribe to this term, but for lack of a better term, I'll just use having the right relationship with God or the source of that energy is going to really impact what energy you bring to every moment, every situation, every encounter. And I think that's... Thank you, Paul. And I think that's why it deeply matters how, like, what you are, in a sense, plugging into.
Yes.
And the thing is, a lot of people, like I brought this up, and I mean, basically, a lot of times rest is thought of as like vegging, watching Netflix, scrolling on the phone, like doing this kind of like... You're unplugging by plugging into other electrical sources to be able to, quote unquote, rest.
Right.
And it's just, if you think about that from a systems point of view, what the very interesting thing is that quite literally you're draining some energy in order to do that rest.
Yeah, I mean, Gurdjieff would say it's the exact opposite. You're giving your energy to the technology.
It's very likely that you're depleting your energy. And that's why sometimes people don't feel any much better. Like they sort of feel like...
feel better.
They may feel blah, or they just feel like... Or they're... they don't necessarily... It would depend on every individual person. But the idea of somebody feeling like literally energized... Like more energy.
No, vegging makes you feel like a
vegetable.
Yeah, all vegging does is make you feel like you're vegging. I have not seen anyone veg and say now I'm ready to do that poem. They veg and they don't. They feel like a blob.
They feel like a blob and then go to sleep.
Yeah, people veg and go to bed. What do people do after they veg? They go to bed and then they just cheat because you get the energy of morning, which is a cheat. I mean, vegging leads to vegging. Like you feel bad and then you feel bad and then you go to bed. And you wake up the next morning and feel better because you're using sleep to feel better. Because sleep is energetic. Sleep can create energy, but it's not the vegging that does it. Vegging just makes you feel like vegging. So, no, that's not energetic. I mean, the sad thing is you could argue the modern environment is one where energy is so hard, the energy of personal connection is so hard to get, that you forget even about that possibility.
Oh yeah.
And you compensate by potato chips or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that it's a very important point that sometimes we forget the nourishment that is actually in human connection.
Yes.
And we've lost this with a lot of our like communal rituals, just whether it be religion, whether it be the fact that people had to kind of commune more in order to eat even, and such things, right? That we talked about it with music the other day, right? Where the atomization of everyone just listening to their own music versus like if you were to, oral tradition, coming gathering around together, all of these things. And I think that, there's something that can be so nourishing about human connection. And yet it can also be extraordinarily painful and broken.
Yeah.
And so people, it's difficult because like if that's really mostly what you know, then of course you're not going to go to people to get nourished because you always think of it as really, really draining.
Yeah.
And so then you'll just do the TV or whatever, the Netflix or do the streaming or do the video games or do the thing. And you won't, and unfortunately though, those things can kind of also, because they also artificiate a lot of connection, that can compromise your actual sleep. Sometimes, you hear people talk about, why was I up till 2 a.m. scrolling? Yeah, I don't know either. I think most people don't know. I mean,
no, they don't.
When I've had certain seasons of that, like not that I've had big seasons like that, thankfully, but I can empathize. I mean, I've been there. And then you're like, what am I doing? I don't want to do this. And I talked a little bit about that with Seth, because I did this thing called scrolling like 4 years ago. Kind of gets into like getting curious with that self-hatred that people can feel with doing that. And then thinking, oh, wait, this is sort of revealing something about my humanity.
Yes.
Because I'm doing this because it's a seeker energy.
Yes.
You're seeking something. So anyway, but yeah, basically it can compromise your ability to even sleep well. Sometimes people don't, it's like they're not sleeping very well, or they're not, and it's like this is why it's important to talk about it, because the restedness you could possibly receive by recognizing these as like in a sense kind of counterfeit connections may help you actually be able to do the work of energy in better in general, you know. But I get it, like I empathize with the people being like, I don't know where to find the like actually beneficial human connections. I really deeply empathize with that, and that's where, you know, there's a kind of empathy you have to hikimorism.
Yes, absolutely.
However, it's still very devastatingly problematic in many regards, and that's why it has to be like looked at.
Well, it all kind of so if most of the time encountering the other or dealing with people that disagree with you is horrible, then you're not going to do it. And you see, here's the problem: the brain naturally wants to enclose you. It naturally wants you to avoid otherness. And that is already at play. And so then when you encounter otherness and it doesn't go well, it seems like the brain was right.
Absolutely.
You should have just listened to it, dang it. Like, all that ever happens is other people make you miserable. But this is why, but then of course that leads to enclosure, self-enclosure, which leads to hikimorism. And then the possibility of the energy and power of human connection, relationality, and subjectivity is lost, and the AI singularity wins. The logic of capital leads to AI, as the Downs talks with land, and that's it. So the stakes are very, very high. It's like Gurdjieff saying, it's, you know, our energy, our attention, and attention is energy as well. Like, that's also the kind of key...
Antenna. Think about it. Right?
Yeah, the antenna. And that's the key... that's one of the revelations that technology is showing us, is that, you know, it's taking our data, taking our energy, you know, taking our attention. We say, well, what's the big deal? That's free. Oh, no. No. It is your very life
very
energy. You know, it doesn't affect your wallet so much, but you pay a very high price in vegging and addiction and so on and so forth. So, but hey, if all your attention ever did is, you know, get you rejected or feel miserable or negativity, you know, that's no good, right? But that's why having various, dare I say, mythos, rather be in Hegel, psychoanalysis, Christianity, etc., of negativity is good. You need to suffer negativity. You need to go through negativity. If you don't have that, then it's rational just to give in to your brain that says, get away from the other.
Right. And that's why, like, it's kind of we're trying to here, I think what we're doing in, like, live is to assume the best about why we don't assume the best.
Yes.
Typically.
Yes,
you know?
absolutely.
It's like, there's reasons why people do it.
It's structurally necessary.
Right.
Like, you also couldn't get the ball rolling. Human couldn't function. They couldn't start if you didn't start in a certain small step. Like, if you were exposed to otherness too soon, like as a child, you'd be destroyed. It's Lovecraft. It's that Lovecraft with the craft in parentheses, Dante and H.P. Like, you have to gradually be exposed to otherness with time. But the problem is, you never get out of your child habits, right? You never get out of your younger habits that were necessary for survival. So you can say it goes with the body. Like, you need a body that when you feel pain, you naturally go, oh, I shouldn't do that. When you feel discomfort, you go, oh, I shouldn't do that. Like, you need to start there. But then if you always through life assume difficulty equals don't do, well, then you end up in a utilitarianism, technological essence that destroys the human being, because we need difficulty and negativity. You don't listen to the body, as we've talked about. You assume if the body hurts, that means you need a pill, when really it could be the body telling you something, right? Yeah. So that's where assuming the best of the body also begins to come into play, where you understand that the body structurally must naturally make you experience pain or discomfort as something you should get away from, so that you survive as a young child. But then as you get older, actually, if you can face that negativity, then it can become energy. It's just like, I guess what I wanted to say is, one of the ways you create energy is by facing negativity. Like, everyone's doing the cold shower thing. Like, if you go into cold temperatures, you wake up. Like, people in the morning are trying to wake up. Just go do a cold shower, right? Like, you know, so that's a big deal. Like, actually, negativity can create energy, and it kind of gets into some of the shaman stuff that Cleo was talking about, the net. But I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. I think that's really good. It makes me think too. I saw something that this woman shared. Her name is like Yolandi.
Mm-hmm.
She has a book called The Portal. But anyways, the point about it is she was talking about bliss coming from the on the other side of discomfort, like because she basically talks about blissful birth.
Yep.
But she's 44. She's pregnant with her 11th child, and she talks about like weight training. Basically, as you mature, you can choose being operative word, to allow yourself to experience discomfort for yourself personally, right? And she was talking about it specifically as it relates to weight training and resistance training, and how she was basically just saying like I cried this morning after in my workout because it was of how it was so difficult, right? But that is necessary for her to be able to birth in a way that is blissful, and she even says pain free. Like she's relating this idea of bliss and pain free to the ability to subject yourself to pain willingly, consciously, with awareness, so that you can develop the fortitude and the strength and the resilience to undergo the natural process of birth in such a way that isn't like with so much resist. Like if you don't do the resistance training, you will resist the pain so much that it will be painful. It will be very painful. As the idea of surrender is like, well, what does that actually mean? And she's saying that surrender often comes from actually making yourself have to deal with and train with resistance. And that's, I think, a similar thing. Like we talk about philosophy this way too, right? Where the whole idea of like making yourself like hear the other side, making yourself really think about the fact that wait a second, they could absolutely be true. Even though everything in my, he's like, I want to get the recording back.
I want to eat it. Eat it! Eat the recorder!
But basically, you can do this philosophically too, right? This is the lifting of the weights or the strength training when it comes to reading the stuff you don't agree with.
Yeah, exactly.
Being aware that the stuff you don't agree with, or even the stuff you think, well, oh no, if they think that's true, that could be harmful. Like you're literally having to entertain that as a truth. Doesn't mean you operate from it being true, but you actually allow yourself to consider that it's true for that other person. And so that's your philosophical weight training that you can, and you could do this also with reading books, listening to things you don't agree with, allowing yourself to have open dialogue with those that are very different from you, all of that. And because if you don't, it's still going to show up somewhere. It's still going to show up somewhere, and that's another thing with like this whole energy reclamation is like, I do think that it will show up somewhere when when all you do is actually energy drain as your form of rest.
Completely. Well, I think the parallels are.
Anyways, I just thought that was very relevant.
No, the parallels are spot on it. Well, so a few things. Like, Greg Denver in his book on Hello, to Metamodernity, which is a very important book. There's that stress on the idea of, well, even if we can't be certain that a person's ideas correspond with reality, we can know that they have those ideas and that they believe they correspond with reality. In the same way that even if we can't know that what a character in a novel is happy about is legitimate or really happy, we can know that the happiness of the character is real. So what he's saying is you base your certainty, per se, although it's not confidence, on the emotional interiority of people, right, of characters. Well, assuming the best is doing something similar, where what you're doing is saying, well, maybe that person is wrong, but I know that they don't think they're wrong, and so I'm going to speak from that place. And you can't actually, you see, you're basing the confidence not on a position or a worldview on who's right or something like that, but on the structural necessity that people must experience themselves as right. And oddly, that becomes a much stronger and solid foundation for conversation. Versus if you're trying to determine what is right, you can't get certainty. So you're just stuck. But if instead it's like, let's speak from the place that assumes that everyone has good reason for thinking the way they do. That actually is much more solid ground. And if you don't do that, you get into trouble. Well, similarly, like you're doing something with the body, like instead of assuming that what the body is feeling is broken or wrong,
that actually you kind of assume that the body for some reason thinks that this feeling is good to feel, like that there's a reason for this emotion or feeling or pain or whatever, right? That it's a signal that has to be worked with. And so you're trying to actually read it and learn it and different things. And look, I mean, if we don't learn to handle resistance, well, then you weaken your emotional immune system. You weaken your ability to handle otherness. And this is the danger of people now seeking belonging in old ways, like removing pluralism, this rejection of liberalism and globalization, which in some respects I completely understand. And there are forms of it that are very problematic. But if you start doing the thing where it's like, well, if everyone thinks, like me, if I find a bunch of Christians that are similar in mind or people of the same race, we're seeing the return of small fascist states, because you're saying, well, what that ends up doing is the problem is that it feels good. The problem is that it is enjoyable, actually. And so what ends up happening is you weaken your ability to handle otherness, and it's only a matter of time before people encounter otherness and there's an eruption because they can't handle it, right? Yeah. So there's lots of trouble. In the same way that it's only a matter of time before people feel a pain or difficulty in their body as they get older or something that if they're not ready for, it destroys them or they can't work with or they can't gain energy from, right? Like if you can handle resistance can be a source of energy. Like if you can learn to sublimate negativity, then actually it creates energy. And in a world lacking energy, that becomes incredibly important. Mm-hmm. But that's where, for us, belonging, again, in a new way, is tied to the question of handling otherness. Because that creates a new energy, a new form of rest that embraces resistance, that's able to work and tarry with resistance. And that has to be in the mind and in the body.
Yeah. I think that's really good, Daniel. And I think there's something there I want to sit and think about a little bit harder on. Transmuting pain, and it makes me think of like not avoiding, and how just human it is. Understandably, we want to survive, so we avoid certain things. Yeah. And there's wisdom, right? We talk about wisdom versus fear. Yeah. But I think ultimately, that's very, very true about this. This idea of resistance and how if we could do it in a mode of almost more like. Mindful play or something like that, where it's play and it's painful sometimes, but doing it in the playground, if you will, that can be a lot. I mean, that's much better than the reactivity and the hurt feelings and all of that can happen if we don't do that work. It just inevitably will happen, Well, we won't know how to lift the 200 pounds suddenly. No.
Well, I mean, Jochen emphasizes, and I suppose we'll have to close because Paul is trying to eat this fan and Sue and etc. But
he was just beelining to the recorder. Yeah, he's like, I'm
going to
get
the recorder. I mean, Jochen emphasizes that there's a lot to health that becomes habit. At first running sucks, but you get used to it, and so you enjoy it, and then you feel off not to do it, right? Mm-hmm. That may start to provide a certain heuristic for dealing with the issue of resistance that should be worked with and resistance that should be avoided, right? Because you shouldn't intentionally go fight a bear or an alligator. That would be stupid. And it's kind of tied to the fear-wisdom problem. How do you tell the difference between fear and wisdom? Which it's a deep problem. But perhaps if it's a pain or a resistance that can never come out on the other side as a habit that actually you then long for, like in fact, then maybe it's not a pain or resistance that can be sublimated. You see what I'm saying? Like, if you get used to the philosophical discussion of otherness, of talking with people who have different worldviews, then you actually get to the point where if you're in a conversation with people you think too similar with, or there's too much agreement, you can actually kind of feel off. Like if there's not enough questioning, if there's not enough kind of digging into what people mean by the terms, then you actually feel off to hear a sermon or a lecture or whatever that doesn't do that. Well, that's very similar to if you get used to running and then you feel off not to run. So that would be an example of why that resistance is right.
Yeah, I've heard some ladies kind of related to the Village Sessions podcast space where they talk about craving the hard thing. Like you actually start to crave.
Yeah, you crave it, right.
Dipping in a cool spring or like doing like resistance workouts and stuff like that, because you got to the place where like you realize that that's something that it actually is nutritious to do a hard
Correct.
thing.
Correct.
And I think it also shows that you can actually influence what you crave.
Yes. Yeah.
With your habits and with how you think about things.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine ever getting to that point with fighting a lion or, trying to lift a tractor. I know those are ridiculous examples, but there are certain pains or resistances that can never come out to the other side because they would kill you or something, right? So that may be the heuristic. Like, is it a resistance that can come through on the other side to something you crave? And then, of course, what you're actually craving is the energy. That's what you come to crave.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is you're either going to be addicted to that which takes your energy, or you're going to crave that of which creates energy. And the choice is yours.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And using perhaps that as a kind of heuristic might be useful. But we will jump here for more by OG Rose. Please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, so on and so forth. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.